Welcome to WVTC TV Network, capturing family moments in real time, bringing families closer together from the comforts of home. We are unleashing something different to the world. Start your subscription today for the low price of $4.99 per month or $55 annually. Go to www.wvtctvnetwork.com to sign up today. WVTC TV Network is streaming live on 8 different platforms. You can easily download the WVTC TV Network app on the Apple Store, Play Store, Roku, Fire TV, and more. Here at WVTC TV, we have access to movies that everyone can enjoy, including independent films, Sons of a Preacher and a Good Thing, Treasures of Life, the epic drama, The Passion of the Christ, and the box office hit Madagascar Escape to Africa. Remember, go to www.wvtctvnetwork.com and sign up today.
Welcome to Living Our Faith and Under the Law. It's Church Law Program. We want you, our viewers, our listeners, to begin to think about how can we make sure that our churches do not end up in the court. We want to make sure that you understand some of the rules and governing documents that every church should have, whether you are ecclesiastical or congregational. You should have bylaws, and you should, if you're ecclesiastical, you should know the church doctrines and disciplines that govern your particular church. If you're congregational, that is, you're Baptist and you are Presbyterian, then there is this body of members that really have the final say-so on all church matters. And you have to really put in your bylaws how you expect your churches to function. Even the Presbyterian church has moderators, and so they have a semi-ecclesiastical structure. You know, the Lutheran, the Catholics, and the Church of God in Christ and the Methodists have a very stringent hierarchical structure, and they have these books of discipline, order of the church, that order of the body that you must follow. So you need to know those rules. Today we're going to talk about Johnson versus Antioch in North Carolina. We try to use actual cases so that you will see that we're not just making this stuff up. Churches go to court all the time. We're trying to get you out of court and back into what you're called to do, is representing the body of Christ in the world. And so we have, to do this, we have our 2 people back again. We have attorney Rodney Howard over here. To my left, your right. He is the senior partner in Wilson Howard Law Firm. We specialize in church law, but what we do really is to try to provide training for church governing boards and church officers and pastors. Every pastor now needs a contract with the church, so it's clear. Even if you're the founding pastor, you need to have a written document that indicates what your expectations are as you have sacrificed time, talent, and funds to build this congregation. How do you have deferred compensation? We'll talk about that in a later show. I'm just saying. And over here we have Attorney Aaron McLeod, Reverend Dr. Attorney Aaron McLeod. He's a pastor and a lawyer, and he handles matters of contracts. He will write bylaws with you, and he will do real estate transactions and some intellectual property matters. So you have people that can train, and then people that will design your contract, write your contracts, and help you if necessary in litigation. I don't go to court anymore. It costs too much time, too much money, and I hate to see the church in court. So, Attorney Howard, you keep coming up with all these cases. What we have today?
Well, today we have the case of Johnson versus Antioch United Holy Church Incorporated. It's a North Carolina church It was a small church, only 40 members in the congregation. And initially, when the church was formed, you had two founding members, Rose Johnson and Irene Wallace. And because those members were the founding members of the church, they invested in helping the church to grow. Sister Wallace donated property because the church did not have an initial facility. And so she donated the property that the building was built on, and she donated $150,000 to have the building erected.
She was rich.
And so she was one of the founding members of the church, and she was the initial treasurer for the church. Now, the church, because it was incorporated in North Carolina, it had bylaws which are required by the North Carolina legislation. And she was concerned, as well as Sister Johnson, in terms of how the church was being operated. When Sister Wallace was no longer the treasurer of the church, she and Sister Johnson became concerned that the church was having its assets wasted. They were being expended, and there were no financial audits being conducted. There were all of these things were contrary to the provisions of the bylaws, which required an annual audit. It required membership records. All of the records of the church were no longer being maintained. So they attempted to bring an action against the church itself, seeking to have the current officers of the church engage in bringing the church up to date in terms of its record keeping and in terms of the financial audits.
I'm with those two ladies. She spent too much money to have spend all that money. She gave $150,000 one time.
Yes.
Then she had every right to ask some questions. And the other lady gave them the building. They had every right to expect some order, especially when they didn't just, some people just be arguing in church. These people funded the church. I wish I knew I had a member, $150,000 donor.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, I don't know what the value of the building was. She gives them a whole building. So,
well, part of the thing was these were founding members of the church.
Yeah.
And they were concerned about the church church business being conducted properly. And when they saw that it wasn't, they wanted to take action.
And so now they go to court. The first thing the court, we told you last week, the first thing the court is going to ask for, articles of incorporation. Show me your bylaws.
Church bylaws and constitution. Now, again, we had the same issue that comes up about ecclesiastical abstention versus the neutral application of the law principle. And
so ecclesiastical abstention means, as the court, I will abstain. Like when you abstain from sin, you abstain from drinking, you abstain. Okay, I'm going to abstain as the court from dealing with this church case because it is an ecclesiastical matter. And that's what they just use a big word. Go ahead.
Well, what the court essentially said was, even though this is an accounting matter, this is a matter that should be able to be applied by applying neutral principles without having to get into the church doctrine, we refuse to take jurisdiction.
Why did they refuse?
Again, we don't want to be involved in the internal matters of a church. And therefore, how we interpret the U.S. Constitution and Constitution of North Carolina is such that we refuse to involve ourselves in a religious organization's internal affairs.
So here's what the court said is, in order for your case to be heard by a judge, they have to have jurisdiction. They have to have subject matter jurisdiction. and they have to have jurisdiction of the parties. So the court said it did not have jurisdiction of the subject in this case because it was, in their judgment, an ecclesiastical matter. Therefore, it shouldn't come before them. It should be handled at the church. So the court said we don't have the authority to decide this case. And that's saying they didn't. When you abstain from something, you don't do anything. So when they abstained, they didn't make a decision for or against either side. What happened?
Well, unfortunately, because the court refused to be involved, there was no remedy from a legal perspective that was able to be undertaken. And what we have, again, is a situation where even though the church bylaws were being infringed upon, the courts refused to deal with that, and you don't have a dispute resolution provision in the bylaws to govern these kinds of situations. And again, here we have the question of church finances. There was also an allegation, of course, that when one of these founding members received a letter from one of the church board members indicating that they were going to terminate her as a member, she also included a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The court said that is a legal matter we can deal with. So the dismissal of the complaint in its entirety is not justified, but the issue as to the church functionings, we don't want to get involved in, but we'll send this back to the trial court on the claim of the intentional infliction of emotional distress.
And why do we laugh about that?
I don't know. Why
It's
do
like
you
the
laugh?
lowest level of tort that you throw in a dart to get
Well,
the stick.
she said, I'm so emotionally charged by
She was
this
embarrassed. She felt that
in the public.
it embarrassed her. It humiliated her in terms of her reputation in the community. All of these
She
things.
probably had night sweats and stuff. She could probably say a whole lot of things.
But in terms of the resolution of the matter of the court, of the church rather, that was what we are trying to be concerned about. And again, there are issues, especially when it comes to the church finances, which every member is always concerned about. And oftentimes that is the basis upon which people are willing to go to court or try to go to court. And again, we're looking at a situation where the courts don't necessarily want to take jurisdiction.
I don't want to get involved in that, especially in the Bible Belt. The southern states are considered Bible Belt in the first place. I think that's why you have to have procedures in your bylaws for handling disputes between members. Was there a finance committee? Do you have a finance committee provisions in your bylaws? And how do you require the finance committee to not only keep records, but report to the members?
And you want to make sure that that is ongoing. If there's a gap, if they don't do it and at any particular time, if it's supposed to be done annually or quarterly or however it's supposed to be done, you as a member should raise the alarm about that and make sure that the people who are responsible carry out the functions that they were given.
If you're an officer in the church, you're a pastor in the church, you should not shy away from annual, I would say quarterly meetings to look at finances, quarterly meetings to look at membership role, who's on the membership rolls, how are you keeping those records? Are you keeping them in a computer somehow? Do you have a secretary that is filing in a filing system that nobody knows, but that's secretary or clerk or church clerk? How do you maintain church records? Where are they maintained? Are they kept in a place that is off-site that's safe? Or do you have a safe in the church for holding your church records? But for this situation, how could this have been resolved better? What should have happened at that church to avoid going to court?
There's two sides to every story, right?
Give me the side that keeps them out of court.
One, I don't know if there is a side to keep them out the court, but the way that the judge ruled arguably is consistent with law, but the absence of provisions for dispute resolution to deal with this matter actually favored the church. On the opposite side,
You think that favored the church?
Mhm.
because they didn't have to give account for the
No,
malfeasance.
but I'm saying so that, but all of them paid money. The ladies that took them to
Mm-hmm.
church, the church had to hire a lawyer to defend them.
Mhm.
So I'm saying, how could this whole case been avoided?
I don't know if the
You don't think it could have been avoided?
just because the court won't rule does not mean that the person won't file to get the ruling that the court.
If
can.
your bylaws are clear
Mhm.
and everybody know, if I ask church members right now, tell me if you've ever seen your church's bylaws. That's a secret document that nobody knows about.
Agree, but to your point, your question was how would they stay on court? Just because you have the bylaws, which you need to have, does
You
not
have to
mean
have the bylaws. Everybody has to know them.
To
You
know
have
them.
to have dispute resolution
Mhm.
clause that requires you before you go to court, you must do these three things.
And the no member is authorized to go to court unless and until there has been an internal administrative review of the matter. And
And it's not resolved.
Mhm.
And
so those are the types of things that are part or should be a part of the church's governing documents. All of the religious organizations need to have some type of dispute resolution provision that allows the church itself or the religious organization itself to resolve these matters internally rather than be in court.
within that, right? Should there be a provision about how the church accepts donated gifts?
yes, there should be a procedure in writing. How do you receive? Go ahead.
Well, that's another court case that we're going to get to.
We're going to talk about how you receive donations because I know y'all don't know, but we are going to talk about that. But there should be a procedure in the bylaws. You can't just take stuff. As a lot of times people, Brother Pastor, Sister Pastor, I want you to have this. Yeah, but let's put that in writing because family members will come back and say, she didn't have no right to give that to you. That was my mother's stuff.
Well, and is it a gift to the church or is it a gift to the pastor?
You had to make sure it's in
Because
writing.
there's another case that we have where
We're gonna be here
an
forever.
individual gave a vehicle to the church for church use, but he gave it to the pastor. It was put in the pastor's name. The pastor got the license for it and all of that. And then when they fell out, they said the pastor was using church property for his personal use. Now, again, those are the kinds of cases that
We're trying
and
to get
issues
y'all out
that
of court.
it shouldn't be in court. But
But
we
don't
have to have provisions in our bylaws to say how property is to be received by the church. If it's a donation, if it's a gift, or if it, and
You do
certainly if
probate?
it's a purchase by the
I do,
church.
and I was going to bring that up, right?
We're gonna have a probate session for
But-
you because I know you want
Estate
to know.
planning, right? So
Yeah,
to
estate
your
planning.
point, I would not have counseled her to give the real estate up the way that she did. I would not have conveyed it that way. I would have had a determinable distinction whereby it could revert back
To who?
to the church, to the woman who donated the property.
So her family could get the property.
Not necessarily that, right? So the $150,000, that's gone. But the property, you can be simple determinable. You can have the property as long as it's used for official church business. There's no alcohol, or put some sort of stipulation.
Oh, he wants to
and then
keep the
reverts back.
property used by a church, used as a church because what?
So
good?
long as it's used by the
Right.
church.
for
or
church,
church
for
purposes.
religious purposes.
In a religious way.
Yeah, because sometimes the church gets the property and then it's in a certain
Mhm.
place and they want to sell it for some other use. Church moves away. And that's not what her intent was. So you need to have estate planning and probate. We're gonna have somebody talk about that because there's so many ways that you go to court. And then sometimes family members of elderly members who haven't done anything for the church or the family member want to inherit. I bet her children were upset when they found out she gave the church a flat $150,000. I bet you that. But that's not part of the case.
And then, even with the gift, it seemed like she was somewhat paternalistic and thinking that she had an ownership interest in the church. Not technically, but I gave this was mine. The
She
Bible,
gave him $150,000.
and the Bible also says that you should not give grudgingly or out of
She
necessity.
gave it cheerfully.
But
She wanted
once it's
other-
given, if you don't give with provision or with stipulation, rather, it's gone.
Well, she just asked for an accounting.
Mhm.
You don't
She
think-
was concerned that the church's assets not be wasted. And
dissipate.
she also made a claim in that case that certain people within the church benefited personally
Mhm.
from the mismanagement, and that might jeopardize the church's tax exempt status
Mhm.
under 501c3.
And she said some other people took the money and gave it to themselves, the church members.
Yeah.
They can't do that. And she gave it for church maintenance and up building. That's why you have to put it in writing. So you can't just walk up here, $150,000. I wouldn't like, well, I don't have it. I wouldn't get nobody 150 without some stipulations. And she wasn't thinking, she was trying to help grow this 40-person church.
Mhm.
Well-intentioned, good intentions pave the way to hell. Y'all hear me? I know that's just like a low drop. That's why you need to have somebody to help guide you. The church receiving gifts and the giver, the donor and the donee. You both have to understand in writing what you're doing, what your expectations are. As what else you have? Give me 10 things that should be in every church bylaw. Areas that they should discuss.
Well, certainly the duties and responsibilities of the church officers.
Mhm.
If there's going to be a treasurer, does he or she have to be bonded? And how many signatures should be required
Mhm.
for transacting church financial business? Those kinds of things, but also the idea that who owns the property, how can property be acquired, or how can it be sold? If the entire church congregation has to vote on the acquisition of property, the entire church congregation should be advised when the recommendation is to sell the property. There have been church cases where churches have done developments, and unfortunately, the pastor and the senior leadership decided to sell off the church property without notice to the congregation.
And make a profit for themselves. You got 5. What?
Yeah, I think that
5 things legally in bylaw.
mediation clause or a dispute resolution clause, description of church officers, and
Roles, responsibilities, and tenure.
mhm. Also an ethics clause as far as disclosing conflicts of interest.
That's a really good one.
Um,
We're going to talk about that in greater detail.
Well, first and foremost, there should be a statement of church doctrine. What do we believe?
Yes,
If there's a church covenant, that should be included.
in the
But-
bylaw.
And all those doctrinal elements should be put into the bylaws of the Constitution of the church so that it's clear what our doctrine is. Again, many people say, I'm joining the church, but they have no idea what they're joining. And if they are able to receive a copy of the bylaws when they first become members, they can make an intelligent decision whether they can follow the rules and regulations of the church.
And they should be dated. Your bylaws should be updated annually. There should be a date at the bottom of them. Because let me tell you why. Every church that we've had to go to court with, we found out there were like 3 or 4 copies of the bylaws. And each group had a different copy. The pastor had a copy, the deacons had another copy, and the trustees had another. We need one bylaw that all church leaders and members have a copy of.
And are following.
Every year you go through it. The best thing I saw was one church, we took a year to revise the bylaws. We met every month until with all of the leaders, not just deacons or trustees, but also heads of ministries.
And they also included
Youth,
not only youth, but regular members who were not a part of any other ministry. So they wanted church membership to be represented as well as church leadership.
And that way they came up with bylaws that were the church's bylaws, not my bylaws, not bylaws you download from the internet and ask ChatGPT to type them up for you. This has to become the way your church operates, and everybody knows. And when new members come, you give them the bylaws, give them the church doctrine, and you give them the right hand of fellowship. But they need to know you're enjoying all the rights and privileges of any other member. Here are the rights and privileges in writing.
Yep. And then the process, as you said, by which you disseminate, I personally believe that the bylaws are key. I think that they should be drafted specifically for that church.
Right.
It should not be boilerplate. You may be able to reference a reason by example from another institution, but all churches are different. And so, for instance, new members class, could
Put
be,
it in there.
5 sessions, one session on bylaws, but more specifically, even the dissemination of the bylaws and how that works is different based off of church. So if you have a 25,000 member church and you have 25,000 copies of the bylaw, arguably there may be a better way to manage that distribution.
You can email them. You
It could be on the website, but more specifically,
can put a QR code.
but those bylaws will probably pale differently than a church that is more parish style, that has smaller membership, different values.
And you can have it, where they can download it from the website, but they should know you are governed by these things. I don't care how large or small you are, you ought to be able to know how your church functions, because there are times when you will want to challenge things. You need to know the limits of your challenge. Yes.
One other thing that should be in the church bylaws is a dissolution clause. And the dissolution clause should say what should happen to the church and the church property if the church is ever dissolved, and it should be in accordance with, if the church is seeking tax exempt status, 501c3 provision. And so that dissolution clause has to be in the bylaws if you're going to apply for tax exempt status.
Well, I wish we had more time. I can't give you more free legal advice. You've heard from these two gentlemen. I'm done. You have to tune in every week. We want you to call your pastor, call your chair, the trustee, call your chair, the steward board, call your chair, the deacon board, call your missionary president, all of the church leaders. Tell them to tune in every week. We're on WVTC talking about pastor, church, and the law. We live in our faith.
And under the law.
Live in our faith. Under the law.
Another law.
I'll see you next week.
Go to your Apple or Google Play Store and download the WVTC Gospel Radio app today. You can also say, Alexa, play WVTC Radio Skills.
Would you like to play WVTC Radio Network?
Absolutely. Download it today.
Views made on the preceding program are not those of WVTC Radio, iNetworks Communications, or their financial supporters.
Winning victory through Christ, WVTC Allsip Chicago, and iNetworks Communication Station.